Before I start this video, I'd like to give a huge shout out to MaddMike for collaborating with me. If you like my videos, you'll really like his. He makes amazing horror narration story videos just like mine, but his are usually just really long. He puts a lot of effort in his videos, and personally, I really enjoy them. So if you don't already subscribe to him, go check him out. Hopefully you guys enjoy the video.
This event happened to me and a group of friends in the summer of 2013 in Virginia. It's been a story I've told a lot of friends and classmates, but left out a very personal detail. This is the first time I'm sharing that detail. In high school, everyone was looking for places to drink. That was the question every weekend practically. Where are we going to drink tonight? Once we found a spot where we could drink freely with limited chance of being arrested, we went there every weekend until we got bored. That sounds terrible, I know, but come on. We lived in an extremely boring white middle-class gated community-ridden town. Drinking was a fun way to almost rebel against our parents and get away from the continuity of life there. So my family and I moved here to Virginia from the Midwest, and we did a lot of outdoorsy things when we lived in the Midwest. And once the move to Virginia happened, my dad ended up getting real sick, which prevented him from being outside for long periods of time. Camping was always something my family and I used to do when I was little. And now being a senior in high school, I remember how much beer my parents could drink without being disturbed. It was perfect. Get a bunch of buddies together, buy a few cases of beer, go out into the woods and camp for a weekend and get plastered for my birthday. So we did our research and found a nice looking place about 40 minutes away. We packed the cars full of food and gear, and of course, beer. When we got to the campsite, the place was packed with campers and tents. We could hardly find a spot. The only space that was open was site number 2, which was right by the registration office. Fuck, they will definitely be able to see us drinking. But we noticed that everyone in the office left at like 5 p.m. and didn't come back until 11 p.m. the next day. So we unpacked our stuff and camped for a weekend, and it was great. The weather was absolutely perfect. We never ran out of beer. We got to go swimming the lake. We got sun and we got away with it. So then, of course, we go back to our cookie cutter neighborhood and tell all of our friends how great it was. And the only question we had left was, when are we going to go next? So later that very same summer, we planned out another camping trip. This is where it got very strange. We got like half of the original group to come back again, as well as 2 very attractive girls who signed on to go with us. We were of course going to go back to the same place we went to last time when we had such a fun time. So we did the 40-minute drive back to the campground, and I noticed it felt different on the drive-in. I attributed it to the cloudy covered sky, but something else felt very different. We arrived at the campground together, and the first I noticed was that there was nobody there. No tents or campers anywhere, except for one. There was also nobody in the registration office, which I thought was strange for 3 p.m. on a Friday at the end of July. I just remember thinking, I should be weirded out by the fact that there's nobody here right now, but nobody else seems to be noticing, so it might just be me. But something's not right. It was like everybody else knew something we didn't. The one other camper there didn't have anybody in it. We were there for 3 days straight and we didn't see a single person come in or out of the camper the whole time. Nor did we see anything on their surroundings move around. The whole weekend ended up being pretty weird. The weather was rainy and humid, so we spent a lot of time in the tent just roasting and drinking beer. We were sitting in the tent when one of the girls says, "Is there someone walking on our site right now?" I poked my head out of the tent, and there was a state ranger parked at our site looking right at me, not 3 feet away from the tent opening. I immediately freaked out because we had been drinking in the tent. So I said, "Hi sir, how can I help you?" And all he said back was, "Don't forget to pay your camping fees." Then he stood there for like a minute just staring at me. He gave me a small chuckle before backing up to his truck and getting in and driving away in the direction of the empty camper. I went back and told the story with relief because we got away with drinking, but something didn't feel right about that. But that's not the detail. That comes into play that night. We were sitting around a campfire, drinking beer and telling funny stories. Earlier in the day, one of our friends, Mitch, went to go get more beer since we ran out. The only problem was he left at 3 p.m. and still wasn't back at 12 a.m. So I was slightly freaking out. The culmination of all the weird things deterred me away from drinking any beer that night, so I could stay clear-headed in case anything weird happened. Boy, am I glad I made that decision. So we're all sitting around a campfire telling stories when I notice a car drive up. Thinking it's Mitch, I jump up to see, but it's just a brown, rusty-looking truck, and it pulls into site number 1, which is a stone's throw away from us. It should have made me feel comfortable to know we're not alone out here in the woods, but it didn't. It still made me paranoid, specifically for 2 reasons. Number 1, it was 12:30 a.m. There was no reason he should be here at this time if he was just going camping. Number 2, he didn't have any tents or camping equipment in the back. All he had was a blue tarp covering a half-full bed. So I stay aware, but calm as to not freak out my group of friends. But I noticed him setting up a floodlight and a wooden bench. But that's all I could see because he's parked his truck on the far side of the campsite to block view from us. I'll talk to myself down by saying, just calm down. You're being paranoid. It's probably just something you don't want to get involved with. So I turned my full focus to my friends and even started drinking some beer. About an hour later, I made my worries about Mitch known to everyone, and they all calmed me down. But as I was agreeing with them, I looked up and saw a man walking into our site, but I only caught him in the light of the campfire, so he was already next to us before I could even react. The man said in a thick Eastern European accent, "Hello, I am park ranger for this park, and I just wanted to offer you 2 complimentary pieces of wood for your fire. You know you're not allowed to bring your own wood here, because it can have bugs in it. Enjoy and have a good night." We waited until he was out of earshot before giving it the, "What in the fucking hell was that? We're outside, don't bugs live out here? Why would it matter?" But I noticed when he put the wood down next to our fire, there was a part of him that didn't bend when he did. Once he was walking away, I saw it swinging from his belt loop. It seemed like he was carrying a large machete. Mitch still wasn't back at 2 a.m., and I was afraid for his life, so I asked my close friend Mop to ride with me to go find him. It was a 1-road drive, so he had to be on it no matter what. I was also going to voice my terrors and concerns with him in the car to see if he felt the same things I did. We were driving down the road looking for a crashed car or Mitch heading in the opposite direction. As soon as I opened my mouth to ask if Mop was freaking out too, we saw Mitch speed past us, which was a huge relief to me. I whipped a quick U and started following him back to the site. Once we were all back, I told Mitch the story of the strange wood guy and how we thought he had died. But he had brought the beer and we all started drinking once he was back. I began to notice a pounding sound coming from site number 1 that sounded a lot like he was chopping wood. Yeah, that makes sense. He's the park ranger and he is chopping wood for them to sell, and he gave us 2 complimentary pieces. That makes sense, until we ran out of wood and they asked me to go steal some more. Nothing made sense about that. We brought bundles of wood, enough to last us through the night, and it was gone. So I guess I had to go steal some wood. Now the wood tower was between site number 1 and site number 2, but it was closer to site number 1. I snuck from our campsite through the woods towards the wood tower. I was drunk at this point, so I was not scared of the mysterious wood chopper. I got to the wood tower and began sliding pieces of wood into my arms. The more I get, the less times I would have to come and steal more. So I grab about 8 big pieces and start sneaking back, but not before throwing a glance in the direction of site number 1, where the chopping sound continued. My eyes focused on a wooden bench where I saw the park ranger chopping with his machete a human leg. I saw him plummet the large knife in the thigh, and it cut in about halfway before he raised it again and slammed it back into the same spot, severing it from the rest of the leg. I closed my eyes and froze. I immediately started tearing up and felt like I was going to puke. It felt like I was standing there for hours, there in the dark with my arms shaking from holding the heavy wood, my eyes watering from the trauma that unfolded in front of me. I pulled my legs out of the frozen state and slunk back to our site. I dropped the wood down and just sat down. I didn't know what to do. I could have said something, and we could have gone home and gotten in trouble, or I could keep quiet and not freak everyone out. When I got back, the jokes about the wood guy were spewing out, and everyone was laughing. But it was as if someone had turned my hearing aid down, and I was just listening to cotton. I told myself it wasn't a leg, it was a log. It had to have been a log. This doesn't happen to people like you. It was just a log. I woke up the next day to a beautiful hot summer day. I looked over and all my friends were alive and well, sleeping and waking up next to me. That was one of the best feelings I've ever had, knowing that night of worrying was for nothing. But I couldn't help but remember an extremely realistic dream of the wood guy peering into our tent. He was standing in a screen window on the side. I made eye contact with him and shook my head no, and he slowly walked away. But you know, it was probably just a dream, I guess.
It's been 20 years since I worked as a counselor at Camp Valleyway. 20 years that I've tried to forget what I saw, lying to myself and others about what I know happened. And for many of those years, I succeeded in fooling myself, pushing the dark thoughts to a hidden place in my mind, but after reading the newspaper today, I can lie no longer. Let me begin my story. I started work when I was 15, spending my summers away at Camp Valleyway. The camp was nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, cupped in a valley between two mountains with a natural lake at the center, its waters stained murky with southern clay. I worked as a swim instructor, and each week a new set of campers traveled from across the state to experience the outdoors. I still remember the exact day it happened. Tuesday, 5th week of camp, the hottest day of that summer and just before the 4th of July. That week was known as Rich Week to the counselors, since many of the wealthier parents took off for the holiday and left their children behind. It came right after the Orphan Week, which was when the Clarkstown Orphanage, largest in the state, traveled to the camp free of charge because the camp was government-owned. Yearly, the local residents came by at the end of the week and children were often adopted. Just last week, a girl in my class had found a new home with some farmers a few miles out, and I remember seeing Ellie wave from the cab of a pickup truck as she started her new life in the country. As a swim instructor, in my off time I helped the sail instructors patch sails under the water sports canopy. Logan, the head of the water sports and about 5 years older than me, sat across of the picnic tables, his small eyes looking over the lake. Logan kept his hair in a tight buzz cut, revealing a scar around the back of his head, and when he spoke, it was in a deep drawl. "Mike, watch what you're doing," he growled, noticing I had skipped a stitch. "I only got 2 eyes, and there's too much going on for me to watch everyone today." "Got it," I said, and I put my head down. Logan kept a tight watch on his crew, but now his focus was on the lake. Ed and Ted, 2 twin counselors with one brain between them, were teaching a beginner swimming course. Ed and Ted always made Logan uneasy and had earned a spot of the first and second on his mental list of instructors who were most likely to screw up next. So when Ed, the smarter of the two, came sprinting up from the lakeside so fast his long legs spewed a dirt exhaust behind him, Logan was ready. Ed opened his mouth, words wheezing in between each intake breath and his wet hair plastered over one eye. We're missing one. One camper. Can't find him in the water. Friends don't know where he is." Without hesitation, Logan's whistle shrieked through the campground, startling campers and counselors alike. "Out of the water! Out of the water! All lifeguards to the dock!" he shouted, his deep chest working like a bellow of adrenaline shot through me, and we ran to the water. As a lifeguard, it was our responsibility to search for the body, and 15 of us lined up in one end of the swimming section. At Logan's call, we drove, myself in the deeper end at 14 feet, spread out across the bottom. The water filtered sunlight and heat, so the bottom was cold and dark, with underwater plants that gripped against my calves and pulled me back as I swam. After 3 strokes, I returned to the surface, and Logan sent us back down again to search, hoping to find a still warm form. I was the one who found the body. Its hand brushed against my face, a pale palm that was all too white. I saw the face next, too dark to recognize, but a girl with long hair that fanned around her like she was under static electricity. I gasped, involuntarily drawing water into my lungs, gripped her torso, and began swimming to the surface. She felt swollen, her arms too big, and her temperature cold I will never forget. Halfway to the surface, I felt her leg catch on to something, and she was pulled back down out of my grip. I turned, watching her eyes open on mine as she descended, but my lungs screamed, and I knew I needed air or I would join her down below for much longer than intended. "I found her!" I shouted, breaking the surface. "Quick!" And I dove back down, my hand sweeping through the muddy bottom. But I found nothing but muck and empty water, even as the other lifeguards joined. 5 minutes later, and Logan's whistle rang again, calling us out to the dock. "The camper has been found," he announced, in a restroom by his site. "Ed and Ted must have let him slip past them, and both of them will spend the night scrubbing the dock with your own toothbrushes." He paused, and I felt the other lifeguard's gaze fall on me. "You're all free to go, except for Mike. I want a word." The others trudged away, looking back at us over their shoulder. Logan focused on me, spittle meshing with his words as he hissed. "I don't know what the hell that was about, Mike, but you could have cost us a life with your false call back there, and next time you try something like that, I'll take yours." "But I saw something," I insisted. "I don't believe in ghosts, Mike, and we scoured that water. Get out of my sight, you're off waterfront." He left, and word spread around camp about what had happened. I could tell many of them detested me, and none believed what had happened, so I quit the next week and pushed it from my mind, though it's still found in my dreams. That was 20 years ago, and today I hold the newspaper, the top article calling back my memories. Murders at Camp Valleyway. 19 skeletons have been discovered in the lake of Camp Valleyway, several aged at over 30 years since the time of death, and none younger than 10. Due to renovations, the lake was drained, revealing a collection of bones at the deepest region. Several femurs were found attached to anchors with rope, and after much investigation, the state police discovered the source of the bodies. 10 years ago, before the Clarkston orphanage was shut down for embezzling state funds, each summer their orphans spent a week at the camp. 19 were thought to be adopted by locals in nearby proximity to the camp, but after reviewing records, police have discovered that these adoptions were never documented. All 19 were drowned and disposed of in the lake, at an area too deep for the campers to normally enter, except for one that drifted near the swimming area due to an insecure rope. It is believed that the orphanage collected funds appropriated for these children long after their death. Police encourage anyone with information on the matter to step forward.
Hey you guys, I think I have a little story you guys might like. As a background before I begin, I work at a summer camp in Oregon. It's called Camp Silver Creek. We go by fake camp names that we make up as staff, so please forgive the odd names. I've gone there since I was 8 years old, and now I've been staff there for 4 years. Being staff, you get to do a little bit more adventurous things in the woods as being a camper. Every year during staff training, the staff members all hike to a spot in the middle of the woods and sleep out under the stars. On my second year of staff, being 16 years old, me and my friend Yolo went to sleep away from the rest of the group. So we picked up our tarp and sleeping bags and walked away from the group about 100 yards or so. There are all kinds of legends around the camp about paranormal activity, and there are all kinds of things I used to shrug off as stories meant to scare one another. However, being in the middle of the woods at night, we got pretty freaked out telling each other these kinds of stories. We considered going back with the rest of the group, and I remember the conversation went a bit like this. Oh my god, this is so scary. I think we should go back by the others, man. But they'll think we're pussies. Okay, you're right. Nothing is going to happen. We're just paranoid. A little bit later, we heard some sticks break as if someone stepped on them a little distance away. I immediately grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the general direction. And when I turned my light on, I saw a red-eyed, shadowy demon-looking creature standing up against a tree. Yellow and I looked at each other with pure terror and looked back. When we looked back, the creature had gone. We figured it was our imagination playing tricks on us. We finally managed to fall asleep, and when we woke up, we agreed not to talk about it. A few weeks later, after the children had been coming for a while, we were on break and talking to a guy named Hugs. Hugs was a storyteller. He loved to try and freak people out. Every week, we do an overnight hike with our campers, and it's pretty much the same thing as the staff campout I just described, except the kids can't go sleep off on their own. Anyways, Hug says, "Holy shit, guys, wanna hear what I saw on my last overnight?" Yellow and I say something like, "Okay, Hugs, tell us what you saw," with a sarcastic tone of voice. He says, "No, I swear this one is true. I was at Mars Mill, which is the overnight spot where we saw the creature, and I heard a stick break in the middle of the night, and I shone my light up to look at it, and there was like a shadow demon there, and it disappeared after a few seconds." Yellow and I looked at each other and I asked him, "Yellow, don't bullshit me. Did you fucking tell him?" Yellow looked at me with a horrified gaze on his face and said, "I swear I didn't tell anyone." And ever since then, I haven't been quite so skeptical about the paranormal stories I've heard about camp.
This happened to me in late May 2006. I had just graduated high school and was getting ready to start a summer session in college. Of course, I needed money, and a teacher of mine was willing to offer me $200 to teach at an ROTC camp for a week. Of course I obliged for him. I would have done it for free anyways. Something about being in nature for a week would be a great mental break for school. So I headed off to Scoutland on a lake in northeast Georgia and was ready to have some fun with some of my closest high school friends and cut loose with my teacher one last time before college. The teacher was a great guy, ex-Marine Special Forces. He was in great physical shape. The instructors, myself, and some other students that graduated that year divided up all of the current students into a few groups and led them through several classes throughout the week and worked on some leadership development skills for those students who showed promise but hadn't quite made the cut. Throughout the entire week, he would be tracking us through the woods and across several courses, checking in on our progress. This camp had everything you would expect: a main cabin for breakfast and dinner, 3 campsites, a big fire pit, a ropes course, a boat dock, and community showers divided by sex. It was all spread over the course about 2 miles. The first 2 days and nights were great. The instructors were getting our groups to bond, and were getting into some trash talking and competition with the other groups. It was everything you'd expect. That all changed the 3rd night. Every night, we had a series of fire watches. A fire watch is a 2-hour span at night where you watch the camp. I suppose it is beneficial for those in the military that face the threat of attack, but it was mostly just a time for the instructors to goof off at night in groups of 2. 2 guys would start the watch and wake up the next pair in a rotation. My rotation was 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. nightly with my best friend Jonathan. The first 2 nights we just goofed off in the middle of the campground that we rented out for the leadership course. The 3rd night, I awoke to our instructor in my tent. Confused and still half asleep, I fumbled for my watch. I lit it up and it shined 1:37 in a dull haze back at my face. He was trying to get my attention this whole time, but nothing had clicked until I realized I wasn't supposed to be up for another 13 minutes. I immediately shot my attention to his eyes. Someone has been stalking this camp for the last 2 nights, was the first thing that really sunk in. My first thought was, what? You mean to tell me that you have been awake all night and all day for the last 2 days? But what came out was, where? Yeah, like the guy had been sitting in one spot the whole time. The instructor pulled me aside, and I was joined by Jonathan, who I presumed had already awoken. He then explained to us that for the last 2 nights, a man approximately 6 feet tall in height had been sneaking through the woods in and around not only the campsite, but the entire Scoutland. We were being watched by day and night, and the only person there who had any clue was our teacher. The teacher finally tried to apprehend the strange man when he caught him approaching a female tent while the 2 instructors were on the other side of the campsite during their fire watch. As you might expect, we didn't have many females in high school ROTC, so they shared a tent. The teacher, who had been tracking the stalker for the past 2 days, which explained his unusual absence from the camp, called out to the man, and he took off. The teacher followed him as best as he could, but he lost him. So that was the story Jonathan and I got. Needless to say, we pretty much didn't know what the hell to do. We carried on like normal for the next day and checked in with the teacher for dinner after all the students hit the community showers. The men's entrance faced north and the women's south. In between the showers stood a maintenance closet that ran the width of the building, roughly 60 feet. So there we were, eating some hot wings that had been left over and sharing our experiences for the day when it became clear to us that the stalker, whoever it was toying with us. Jonathan explained how students' maps and lensatic compasses had gone missing. I explained how some obstacle courses were missing pieces that are required to solve group puzzles. We also shared some complaints from the girls at camp. Someone's sports bra was missing, another's toiletry kit. There were some other things too, but nothing that seemed too over the top. The teacher told us to go back to camp and take first and second fire watch combined. This was the time during the night when the strange man was most active. Since Jonathan and I were the only other ones who knew about the strange occurrence other than a girl who was awake in the tent when the flap opened, we did as we were told and primarily stuck by the female tent with a flashlight and our pocket knives. Obviously, we didn't have substantial weapons, but we were hoping that in a worst-case scenario, we could blind the man if he approached and maybe stand a chance. Roughly around 1:30 a.m., suddenly, Jonathan, who was standing facing north, saw a figure jump between tree lines. I turned to see what was happening as quietly as I could, and Jonathan quickly whispered his description of the shadowy figure. Then, about 30 seconds later, I saw what I know as my teacher's figure following the same path. We shat our pants. What is it going to look like on the news when a bunch of high school kids at camp wind up slaughtered? And this was totally not worth the $200. As we were contemplating how not to die that night, we heard a loud slam. It came from the community showers. We woke up the next pair that had fire watch from 2 to 4 and, without checking that they were ready, took off toward the community showers. We got there and outside stood our teacher. It was obvious that he had been following the man for some time, probably since dinner. We asked what had happened, and the teacher explained that the man was trapped inside the maintenance closet between bathrooms. I saw 2 sets of footprints in the sand leading to the door, one in combat boots, my teacher, and the other was barefoot. There was only one door, and it was currently being watched by our teacher. So there he stood all night, probably ready to kill whatever came through the other side. The Boy Scouts showed up the next day to teach a ropes course and drove down the path to camp. They stopped at the showers on the way and asked our teacher what he was doing. He explained to them what had happened, and the head Eagle Scout quickly got his keys together and opened the door. Inside was complete darkness. We shined our flashlights and headlamps around to cover everything. There were mops and brooms, other cleaning supplies one would expect, and a hot water tank. But there was no man. We checked the walls, we checked the ceiling, and we checked everything. The only way out of that closet was the door where our teacher stood all night. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I still keep in touch with the old teacher. To this day, no one knows what happened. It's as if the stalker simply disappeared. There is one piece of information I keep from my teacher. On the final day, as the students were going through their awards ceremony, I was taking down our orienteering course. For those of you who don't know, orienteering is literally a race through the woods with a map and a compass. You go from point to point, collecting hole punches or pieces of paper, and first to the finish wins. Jonathan and I set up the course during breakfast on the second day, using paper plates that we stapled to trees. I was retracing the orienteering route, basically taking down paper plates with point A or point B, etc. written on them. When I got to point F, I noticed something really weird. The paper plate was unstapled and instead tied to the tree using grass and vines that had been braided together. The point F side was flipped around too, and on the other side was written in dirt or charcoal from a stick or something, and it said, "Catch me if you can." He was watching me. I knew at that very point, when I was very alone in the middle of the 2-mile forest, he was watching me.
So a little bit of background. I'm an outdoor camp instructor, and I lead and conduct activities mostly for kids ranging from 7 to 18 years old. And what happened during a period of time where I worked there really spooked me out. And I just found out about this site a few days ago and felt like I finally found a platform for me to share these stories. I'm just going to jump right into the first story. It's night 1 of the 3-day camp, and all the kids were super hyped, so naturally, they were reluctant to go to bed. We had to push them to sleep for a good 30 to 45 minutes, which is way longer than the usual timings. And we usually do our final debrief and discussion for the day and get to shower in our precious few hours of sleep before starting the activities for the next day again. So lights out time was the highlight of our whole day. After putting the kids to sleep, it was about 12 a.m. and all the trainers went to do our final debrief, a brief area cleaning. The final debrief lasted for another 45 minutes. Everyone is super exhausted by now, and it was about 1 or 2 a.m. This is the only timing that we are allowed to go out of the campsite for a smoke since the kids are sleeping. The smoke break usually lasts for about slightly more than an hour, with everyone sharing stories about their kids and really just random things. So after smoking, we trudged back into the campsite. My friend, let's just call her Ash and I strolled back into the campsite last and noticed 2 boys coming out of the dorms. So we thought oh, probably just to use the toilet. But then we saw that they were holding on to something. We walked up to them and upon closer inspection, they had toiletries and towel in their hand. So we asked, "What are you doing up at this hour?" The 2 boys just said, "The female instructor woke us up. She said it was 6 a.m. and we were late for breakfast." In complete unison, it was like they were in a trance. Ash and I were the only 2 female instructors in this whole camp. We knew there was something happening, but we couldn't let the kids suspect anything, so we just brushed it off and said, "You know what time it is now? It's 3:30 a.m. Go back to sleep." The 2 boys went back into their dorms. Ash and I were pretty sweaty and sticky from the whole day of activities, and it was the hottest period that year. We took a quick shower so we can get sleep earlier. As we were walking back to our dorm, Ash suddenly mumbled, "What the fuck?" under her breath, so I naturally turned to the direction where she was looking. 2 different boys walk out of the same dorm as before. We half jogged to the boys and asked if they were going to the shower and to have breakfast. They said yes, again as if they were in a trance. Ash and I confirmed that there was something happening in the dorm, so we sat outside their dorm after sending the 2 boys back in. 5 minutes later, we hear some paper bags rustling from inside the dorm, and 2 different boys appeared at the door. So that makes a total of 6 boys now, with their toiletries and towels in their hand. "Did a female trainer wake you up?" I asked. "Yes," the 2 boys said in unison. "Is she inside right now?" I asked again. "Yes, she's shouting at everyone and asking us to wake up for breakfast. Can't you hear her?" one of the boys said. I would be lying if I said I wasn't completely freaking out, but I had to keep my composure as a trainer/instructor in front of my 9-year-old boys. "Okay, show me the trainer then." I grabbed Ash's arm as the 2 boys led us to the dorm. Everyone was in their sleeping bags. No sign of anyone else other than the kids in the dorm. I turned to the boys and said, "Where's the trainer?" "There." They pointed at the darkest corner of the room. No one was standing there. Nothing at all. Ash finally spoke up. "It's just a trainer pranking you. Go to sleep. We will wake you up in the morning when it's time. The two boys went back to sleep, and we've never moved away so fast from the kids before. No one spoke about the incident, and the 6 boys who the female trainer woke up doesn't remember anything about what happened when we asked them about it the next day. The second experience. This one happened in the same campsite as the first one. So finally the lights out time came, and we do the usual pushing the kids to sleep and final debrief and whatnot. So the next morning came by way too quickly. I got up and got dressed and went straight to the canteen where my kids were told to assemble at. 3 of my boys looked super tired, and I asked if they slept well. "You guys are so mean," one of them said. "Why do you say that?" I took a gulp of my water and looked at my buddy trainer Emerald, and the boy said, "You asked us to sleep, and then when we finally fell asleep, you guys are so noisy. You woke us up again." I was really puzzled as to what he was saying, because as far as I can remember, all of the trainers knocked out really early the night before. "What are you talking about?" my buddy asked. "There were 3 trainers wearing ponchos, playing catch right by the windows of our dorm. You were really loud." I froze in place. This place was used as an execution site around 1942. I'm certain that it was not the trainers who were in the ponchos. "Nah, we were really bored last night, so we decided to play catching," Emerald said apologetically to my boys, and they somehow bought it.